Hi, I'm Amelia Fletcher, Chief Economist at the UK Office of Fair Trading. In this ICN curriculum module, we're going to be learning about competitive effects. You'll hear from me and my colleague Andy Gavel, Professor of Law at Howard University, on the law and economics of competitive effects, as well as the elements of an effects-based approach to competition policy and enforcement. Now, to keep things interesting, but also practical, we'll be making use of a hypothetical case study to illustrate some of the principles that we will be covering. You'll also hear from several competition agencies from around the world on how they applied an effects-based approach to actual cases. After this module, we hope that you'll have a better understanding of what is an effects-based approach to competition policy and enforcement, what are competitive effects, both pro and anti-competitive, and how might they arise, and what are the important economic questions that a competition agency should be looking to answer in applying an effects-based approach. This module is not meant to cover the different tools for evaluating competitive effects, in particular cases, which are as numerous and varied as the cases themselves, nor is it specifically targeted at specific types of conduct. In particular, we won't, for example, be providing a detailed guide to the economic assessment of predation, let's say. At the same time, we are including within our remit the competitive effects of some behaviour that might, in some jurisdictions, and many jurisdictions, may be termed per se illegal, so not requiring proof of effects for illegality. So as such, this module is designed to provide an introductory overview to the competitive effects framework. To start, let's begin with the aims of competition policy. In a competitive market, firms do best when they offer consumers the products and services they most want at the lowest possible prices. So it's this competitive process that leads to the most beneficial market outcomes. The overarching aim of competition policy is therefore to protect this process of competition, albeit not necessarily individual competitors, but the process of competition, and that's to the benefit of consumers and efficiency. Those benefits can include lower prices, but they can also include better quality or service, greater range, or even more innovation in new products. That said, more competition is not always better. Increased efficiencies, like cost savings, for example, can counterbalance restrictions of competition. Therefore, in bringing any case under competition law as a matter of economics, it's important always to consider the theory of harm, or what is expected from this behaviour in terms of competitive effects. The overarching aim of competition policy does not, in fact, depend on statute or form of agreement or conduct. Moreover, the anti-competitive effects can have very strong similarities across different forms of agreement, conduct and statute. But under an effects-based approach, the nature of the competitive effects typically matters more for the analysis than the traditional legal categorisation. Economic analysis enables us to assess whether the conduct is anti-competitive, and that may well also include analysis of the intent of the parties involved and their ability to restrict competition. But overall, the focus is on the conduct that enhances market power or restricts competition. Now, there are two key anti-competitive paths to market power. The first is direct. This is where there is a direct limiting of collective output or a direct increasing in price. Examples include where firms collude with their rivals, or actually mergers falls under that heading as well, horizontal mergers. The other is more indirect. This is where you limit your rivals' output or in other ways disadvantage your rivals. This in turn makes them less effective competitors, or may even exclude them from the market entirely, and that generates market power for the parties that are limiting the output. The crucial economic question that we're asking in each case, though, is will the conduct under examination directly or indirectly create, enhance or facilitate the exercise of market power? Now, in assessing these, there's a number of key factors to be analysed alongside the behaviour. First, closeness of competition. Are the colluding rivals, or the rivals who are having their output limited, particularly close competitors? Ease of entry. Barriers to entry can take many forms. For example, sunk costs, regulations, customer loyalty, proprietary intellectual property, economies of scale, etc. Easy entry can be really important in limiting market power, limiting the ability of parties to gain or exploit their market power. Barriers to entry enhance market power, though. Buyer power also can be a key role in reducing the likelihood of anti-competitive effects arising. Inefficiencies can counterbalance anti-competitive effects. Now, let's introduce a hypothetical case to see how competitive effects analysis might arise in practice. The case involves 3 hypothetical companies in the LCD TV market: Richmond, Stanmore and Nash. Richmond is the largest firm in the market, but it's been losing share to Nash, a recent entrant who's been competing aggressively on price. Richmond is thinking about how it might respond. This next scene features a meeting between Richmond's CEO and the Vice President of Marketing.
Just tell me about something.
Yeah, I was briefed in the extended board meeting today that our sales are sharply down this quarter. Can you tell me what's going on?
Yeah, here's the current state of play. Those are the year-on-year sales figures. The marketing campaigns that we've introduced this past quarter haven't been working as well as we thought. Nash has been aggressively undercutting our price, as you know, and as a result, they're stealing market share and shelf space.
Well, what it seems like to me is that Nash is free riding off our distribution network. We've invested a lot of money in that network. We're continuing to invest money, and all we're doing is really financing Nash's entry.
Right. It was certainly a lot easier before Nash entered the market. What we're hearing from our major retailers is that they're increasingly reluctant to stock our products because they want to leave room on the shelves for Nash. But we're still by far the market leader at about 60% share.
Well, not for long if Nash keeps on growing.
Right. Well, we need to do something about that. So one idea might be to introduce a loyalty rebate scheme for our major retail partners. That would give them the financial incentive to stock our products and not Nash's.
So how would that help us? We've always relied on marketing the quality of our products before. How would that work?
Well, the way it would work is we would give our retailers a sufficiently large rebate if they meet certain sales targets, say last year's sales. That would give them the incentive to sell our products instead of Nash's, and would give us back our shelf space.
Right, I see how that works. Retailers will be willing to invest in our brands if the lump sum is high enough. But what about Stanmore's distribution network? I assume Nash will still have access to that. What's to stop consumers just buying Stanmore TVs from Nash's major retail partners?
Well, it's not perfect, but we're still by far the market leader at 60% share. So I think if we cut off enough of Nash's distribution network, it might be enough to halt their growth and push them to more costly or less convenient modes of distribution. And then we might be able to get prices back to a more comfortable level, at least enough to justify the rebates.
All right, well, it could certainly work if Stanmore implemented a similar scheme. They've got around 30% market share, so together we have around 90%. I'll speak to Stanmore's CEO. They're in a similar position and might be willing to do a similar thing.
Yeah, that's a really, really great idea, actually. You'll probably be seeing their CEO at that trade conference that you're going to in a few weeks. So you might mention it to him there.
Good idea. So can you have a think about the numbers first, how the scheme would work in practice?
Yeah, I'll have a think on it. I'll send you an email later today.
Thanks.
Thanks again for meeting with me today. I thought that was a really productive meeting. We really need to do something about this Nash situation. Following up on your suggestion, I've crunched some numbers to see if a loyalty rebate scheme would actually make sense for us. I'm attaching to this email my initial projections. They show that it would be profitable for us to introduce a 10% rebate as long as retailers match last year's sales. We could increase the rebate to 15% for those retailers that have stocked more of Nash's product lines the past few months. I think those retailers will need more convincing in order to exclude Nash from the shelves. To avoid taking a profit hit, we would need to increase wholesale prices if we go ahead with this. I do think that retailers will be on board, especially if we manage to get Stanmore involved as well. You can consider mentioning this to Stanmore's CEO when you meet with him, but I suggest that we get these rebate schemes in place straight away.
As we just saw, the CEO of Richmond is very concerned about losing share to Nash. The marketing vice president has suggested a solution in the form of a loyalty rebate scheme in an effort to exclude Nash from the shelves. The CEO has also suggested that their second major supplier, Stanmore, might be persuaded to adopt a similar strategy to exclude Nash from their competing retail network. The Vice President has crunched the numbers and he has emailed the CEO the projections which one might expect to provide useful evidence for a competition authority. But first, let's see if the CEO of Richmond is able to convince the CEO of Stanmore that this would be a good idea.
Hi.
Hi, how are you?
I'm very well. How are you?
Good, thanks.
Good, good. There's something I wanted to discuss with you.
Yeah, is it about your loyalty scheme? I hear you're giving generous lump sum payments to retailers for meeting sales targets.
Yeah, well, we had to. I mean, you know how difficult it's been this year. And I'm sure you've seen your own sales figures go down this last quarter.
Yeah, significantly down, all because of Nash. New firms like Nash are going to destroy this industry.
Well, they are. I mean, they're completely undermining our retail network. Margins are being squeezed. And it's only a matter of time before others start coming into the market.
Tough times, but what can we do?
Well, what we're hoping is that with this rebate scheme, retailers won't have the space to stock Nash products. There's certainly a strong financial incentive.
But can't they just use my distribution network?
Well, you could do exactly the same.
But how would that work? It would take a lot of time and a lot of money to invest in that sort of capability.
Well, how about I send you a copy of our retailer contract? You could use that as a template. That should help speed up the process. But please do make sure you keep this all confidential.
Yeah, but what about the cost? It's going to hurt in the short term.
Well, actually, if we put up wholesale prices, then we can make back the rebates as we go along. And if we both do it, then retailers can put up their own prices, thereby maintaining their margins.
I see what you're saying. This might be a way to get our sales back up. What's your timing?
Well, we're ready to implement the rebate scheme straight away, and we think we could put up a price increase in about 4 weeks' time.
Okay, I'll look into it.
Great.
So, Stanmore and Richmond have appeared to reach an agreement in principle here. Stanmore's CEO has agreed to send a template of its retailer rebate contract to Richmond's CEO. One might expect that sort of correspondence to be valuable evidence for a competition authority. Note that the effect of the scheme will not simply be to harm and exclude Nash, but also and importantly to harm consumers by restricting choice and increasing prices. Now let's see how a group of consumers react once the scheme has been implemented.
It's really strange. Last weekend I went shopping for a new LCD TV, but prices seem to be going up everywhere.
I think that's interesting, because I went shopping 3 days ago and I went to lots of different stores, and the Richmond products and Stanmore's products were just so much more expensive than I expected.
I mean, I wanted to get a Nash TV. It's got some nice features on it. It's a little bit cheaper. None of the major retailers seem to be stocking it. One sales assistant there told me that they needed the space for other products. I mean, I can still buy it from Nash online, but I mean, I actually really value seeing the TV in the store. And also, the online delivery risk as well, it's just not really worth it.
You try calling around, because I'm sure they must stock Nash TVs somewhere.
Yeah, but there's none of them convenient ones to see to have it, and I just really don't want to have to drive all the way across town as well.
Yeah, it's really weird, because I thought Nash was selling really well and expanding.
So, it appears that the scheme has been successful from the point of view of Richmond and Stanmore. Nash is no longer on the shelves of the major retailers, and this has apparently resulted in consumer harm from increased prices and less choice. Probably higher profits also for Richmond and Stanmore. Note that while customers can still access Nash online and through less convenient retailers, these are not considered viable options for customers for a variety of reasons, so things like search costs or higher risks. Nash has therefore been foreclosed from a key distribution channel. Now, it's often competitors that alert competition authorities to anti-competitive behaviour. But actually consumers can also proactively make complaints, as we'll see in the next action scene. And some jurisdictions even make use of customer surveys in appropriate circumstances to gather pertinent information, albeit sometimes this is not practical. In the next action scene, we'll see what happens when some of these consumers and Nash voice their complaints to the Competition Authority. But before that, let me turn it over to Andy Gavel.
In our opening scenes, we've developed a hypothetical to help us examine the economic analysis of anti-competitive effect. In our hypothetical industry, we have three principal players: Firm X, Firm Y, and Firm Z. Firm X has a 60% share of the market, Firm Y 30%, and Firm Z, our new entrant, has entered and garnered a share of 10%. The question we now examine is, how can X respond to this new entry by Z? Well, first, it could respond by more aggressively competing. It could improve its product, it could lower its price, it could look at its costs of manufacture and distribution and try to compete head-to-head with Z. It could also think about colluding with Y and Z, forming a cartel to raise price, inviting Y and Z to join it to stabilize prices. Its alternate option is to try and exclude Z. And it can do that either by itself, if it's capable, or it could actually collude with Y to exclude Z. We're going to examine these two possible anti-competitive ways to achieve what we call in antitrust market power. And there's a separate module on market power that you might want to consult before going forward in this one. Market power in an anti-competitive sense can be established through collusion. That's the scenario in which X colludes with Y and Z to raise price. And what they would do is collectively restrict their output. But X can also achieve the same result, the ability to exercise market power, by perhaps impairing or completely excluding Z from the market. In that sense, it's restricting Z's output, which might achieve the same result, market power, as we see in this slide. Market power is at the core of our concern about competitive effects. Market power, as defined, is the ability to raise price above the competitive level. But it can also be a way to restrict other components of competition, like quality or innovation. As we move forward and think about the two ways we've discussed to establish competitive effects, collusion and exclusion, we could move to the next slide and see a visualization of the contrast between the two. With collusive competitive effects, we have direct impact on the next level of buyer. That could be consumers, or in our hypothetical, it's the retailers. And what we notice is that the firms, here depicted as firms A, B, and C, can collectively reduce output and raise price, or restrict some other dimension of competition. Typical examples would be price fixing, but it would also be true of a horizontal merger among the three. The point here is that the economic analysis would be the same regardless of the form of the behavior. If we have rivals collectively restricting their output, they might be able to exercise market power collectively by restricting output and raising price. But there's another alternative, a different kind of competitive effect, an anti-competitive effect that we associate with foreclosure or exclusion, and that's depicted in the next slide. Here we have Firm A trying to impair or impede Firm B. How can it do that? Well, it might do that through input foreclosure, perhaps through an exclusive dealing arrangement with its suppliers that would either raise the price or completely cut off B from access to needed supplies. For example, in our hypothetical, that might be an important component of flat-screen televisions, perhaps the screen or some other component that Z does not make, but that it purchases from input suppliers. A might also be able to impair Z's ability to compete, to raise its costs or completely exclude it from the market by entering into exclusive dealing arrangements with dealers, so that dealers might refuse to deal with Z, or they might deal with Z on terms less favorable than they're willing to deal with X. The end result of either collusion or exclusion would be the same. They would both result in higher prices or some other restricted dimension of competition. But let's compare collusive and exclusionary anti-competitive effects and think a little bit further about how it would change our ability to analyze the conduct. They're both anti-competitive, but with collusion, the goal, if you will, is to marry your competitors. Collusion is always characterized by some direct relationship with rivals that allows them collectively to restrict output and raise price. With exclusion, instead of joining with competitors, the goal is to eliminate or impair a competitor. Sometimes collusion is called classical market power, whereas exclusion can be referred to as exclusionary market power. Now, exclusion may involve a single firm, or as we've created in our hypothetical, joint conduct by X and Y. Sometimes it's referred to as involuntary cartel, if the two rivals succeed in coercing Z into raising its price by squeezing it at either the supply or the dealer end of its transactions. There are some key properties that are important to keep in mind with both collusion and exclusion. Both harm consumers and reduce efficiency. Both are ways to exercise market power. Each can occur separately or together, so that firms might be engaged both in collusion and exclusion at the same time, as we'll see is going to happen in our hypothetical. Each can reinforce the other, so that exclusion can actually make collusion work better. For example, if X and Y alone tried to raise price, they might not be able to do so successfully. Z would happily take away their customers at lower prices. So in order to perfect their collusion, X and Y might actually need to somehow impair Z or raise its costs to keep it from interfering with their collusion. The important point is that the economic analysis of the immediate consequences can vary. With collusion, we focus on the immediate economic consequence downstream. With a cartel, we look at retailers and dealers and consumers and see what the impact is. With exclusion, the analysis of effects is sort of two steps. First, we look at the impact on the rival, and second, the ultimate impact on consumers and retailers. Again, the end result will be the same. Let's now look at what X and Y seem to be proposing. They seem to want to collude together, but the goal of the collusion is to exclude Z, as we see in our next slide. There are some important issues that the agency will want to explore. Will X and Y acting in concert be able to succeed in raising Z's costs? If they can, will that increase in cost be sufficient to facilitate power over price for X and Y? Will it keep Z from being an effective competitor? And finally, will the conduct also produce any efficiencies? You cannot look just at the anti-competitive effects in evaluating the overall context of the conduct and effect. You've also got to consider efficiency justifications. So what will the focus of the agency's investigation be? They will look at market structure, including conditions of entry, to make sure they understand how this market functions. What are the conditions that either facilitate or impede competition generally? They're also going to want to have a detailed understanding of the discount policies that have been proposed. What are the likely effects of those discount policies, not only on X and Y, but on Z? And if implemented, what are the actual effects of the proposed policy? If it has not yet been implemented, the agencies will have to make some predictions about probable effects. And finally, they're going to also need to consider justifications. Notice that in our problem, we have both collusive effects and potential exclusionary effects. So the agency will want to look at both the immediate impact of the conduct of X and Y, but also the potential additional exclusionary effect of the conduct directed at Z.
So are there any other possible cases that have come to light this week?
Well, we've had a high number of consumer complaints in the LCD TV market. Complaints in the last 3 months have actually tripled, and people seem to be concerned about higher prices and less choice.
Right.
I got a phone call yesterday from a company called Nash.
Okay.
They are a new entrant in the market in the production and distribution of LCD TVs.
Right.
They complained about the market situation and they want to meet us.
Okay. But who are the main players in the market at the moment?
Well, although the market for LCD TVs is growing fairly quickly, the market shares have actually been quite stable. There's a company called Richmond, which is the dominant player with about 60% market share, and then Stanmore with about 30%. Nash entered the market last year, and they've been growing quite quickly. They say they have a market share of about 10% now.
Okay.
Their product does have some better features, and it also supports open standards, which makes it more versatile.
Okay.
Yeah, Nash has actually just built a new plant, which has made their production technology more efficient, and this has significantly reduced their cost of production relative to Richmond and Stanmore. And it also seems that the main distribution channel in this market is via retailers. This is because customers consider these products to be expensive. They want to see the TVs live before buying, and also they value customer service.
Right, okay. So what's happening now? What's the issue?
Well, the issue is that Nash is concerned that there has been an agreement between Richmond and Stanmore to set up a loyalty rebate scheme for retailers.
Right.
And as a result, retailers are no longer stocking Nash products because they want to get the loyalty bonus.
Right, okay.
And stocking Nash products would be risky. Nash indicates that there has been a significant and immediate fall in their retail orders by 60%.
Okay. So what do we think is the effect on consumers? Is there a realistic theory of harm?
Oh, there could be if Richmond and Stanmore are working together, because if Nash is excluded from the market, then they'll subsequently be able to raise wholesale prices, and then retailers will probably pass those price increases through to consumers. In fact, we've actually had some consumer complaints already suggesting that retail prices have gone up.
Right, But could there be other reasons for Richmond's behaviour? Is it possible that consumers could benefit from the scheme in some way?
It's possible there could be economies of scale for Richmond and Stanmore, and retailers. It's possible that retailers could see some cost savings by dealing with one fewer supplier. So some of those cost savings could be passed through to consumers.
Yeah, and it also seems that there are some particular retailers in the market that Richmond and Stanmore are using who seem to have a lot of expertise in their products. This suggests that they may have invested a lot in their retail distribution network, and they may be concerned that Nash is free riding.
Okay. I think it seems sensible to gather some more information on this to test the theory of harm. Jib, can you gather market intelligence, market shares, prices, anything you can get your hands on that would be useful? I want to build up a better picture of what's been happening in the market. I think it'd also be good if you could look at how this case fits in with the economic literature on loyalty discounts. And Zoe, can you speak to the retailers and set up a meeting with Nash? I think that would be helpful.
Should we also try and get a warrant?
Oh, good idea. If the agreements were introduced around the same time, then they might well have been talking to each other, so that'd be useful.
For the purposes of this case, we're putting aside market definition. There may very well be other substitutes for LCD TVs, and this inquiry should of course be made. For a comprehensive discussion on market definition, you may wish to access the curriculum module on market definition. Notice how the competition authorities focused on the theory of harm here and the effect on consumers rather than the impact on Nash. So that's a reminder that competition policy is not about protecting competitors, but about protecting competition. Note also that the authority is keeping the theory of harm in mind when thinking about what evidence to gather, and is ensuring that the theory is consistent with economic literature. And finally, see how the competition authority is keeping an open mind as to the potential beneficial aspects of the alleged conduct, or so efficiencies at this stage. We'll revisit this later. But first, let's see what happens after the competition agency gathers some more evidence.
I thought it'd be useful to have a follow-up to our meeting we had a couple of weeks ago when you both went away to get some information on the market. So can we just run through what you found out, please?
Yes, we have actually completed the assessment, and it seems that we were right. We found that Richmond and Stanmore use largely separate retail distribution networks. And they have pretty much a full coverage of the bricks and mortar retailers. And this is actually the main distribution channel for these products.
In terms of the rebates, it seems that Richmond put their loyalty scheme in place about 4 months ago, and then Stanmore subsequently followed about a month later. And it appears, from what we know, that most retailers are actually participating in the schemes.
Yeah. And we also found that the prices of Richmond and Stanmore have increased by a similar amount. We didn't find any evidence as yet that this increase in their prices is supported by an increase in their cost of production.
In principle, Nash should be a strong competitor because they're actually, the production costs are lower because they appear to be using more efficient production techniques. But it seems that they're struggling to secure access to the specialist retailers because of the rebate schemes. And so what Nash has done is to start to use smaller retailers and the internet as a means of reaching consumers. But then obviously those distribution channels are limited in terms of growth prospects and volumes.
Yeah, and customers also indicated to us that they prefer to buy from retail distribution. The reason being that they want to see the TV products live before buying, and also they value customer service. And by foreclosing Nash from this retail network, they have actually increased Nash's cost of display and distribution. And Nash indicates to us that the decline in their sales has resulted in them operating below optimal capacity, which has increased their costs.
Sure. Well, I think that's excellent. I think we can put all of this to them when we meet next week. Thank you.
In this scene, we saw the competition authority summarising the evidence they have gathered to test the claims made by the complainants and the theory of harm. Prices have increased following the introduction of the rebate scheme. Of course, the agency would want to make a careful causation assessment here. Did prices increase for reasons other than the alleged conduct? It seems in this case that they were not driven by increased costs, but could there be other factors? Another question that would need to be asked is, why couldn't Nash just undercut or match the overall deal offered by Stanmore and Richmond to retailers and get retailers to switch to Nash? Is there a reason perhaps due to customer loyalty for Stanmore and Richmond's products? What does seem clear here is that this doesn't seem to be a case of an inefficient competitor being out-competed. Nash is actually apparently quite efficient, although they are being forced to operate on a less efficient point on the supply curve. Are there, though, efficiencies that might be driving or justify this conduct that should be weighed in the balance? I'm now going to turn to Andy Gavel to discuss this issue of efficiencies in some detail.
In our earlier segment, we talked about anti-competitive effects and how the agency would analyze anti-competitive effects. But as we also indicated, the analysis of competitive effects is not complete without a consideration of pro-competitive effects as well. So what do we mean by pro-competitive effects? Typically, we talk about efficiencies, and they are usually the most prominent pro-competitive effect considered in competition analysis. We would look at lower costs, perhaps of production or distribution, but conduct might also result in lower transaction costs, which would be beneficial for competition and consumers. We might consider new or superior products or services. That too might be attributable to the conduct. Innovation in distribution or the product itself could also lower costs or facilitate the introduction of new products, or make the production or distribution more effective and efficient. And finally, conduct might improve market incentives, such as correcting for market imperfections. An example often cited is the free rider effect in intra-brand competition. Well, what would be the consequences of these kinds of pro-competitive effects? Unlike market power, which creates the incentive to raise price, The consequences here might be to create incentives to lower price and to compete more aggressively. Lower price might also mean lower quality adjusted prices. For example, when the quality of a product is improved, even if the price stays the same, from the point of view of consumers, it's a lower price. Diminished incentives to coordinate with rivals, diminished incentives to exercise market power, and diminished incentives to try and exclude rivals might also result from these kinds of efficiencies, because they would create incentives for the firm to compete more aggressively with its rivals. One way to think about and conceptualize pro-competitive effects is to think of their impact on the incentives of the firm, pushing them towards upward pricing or downward pricing. For example, if a firm is thinking about exercising market power, it will consider whether or not raising price and reducing output, losing customers, will prove to be profitable as a strategy. Will the increased profit from those customers that continue to buy outweigh the lost profits from those customers that discontinue buying? They might also consider, however, the impact of downward pricing pressure. If efficiency suggests the possibility of lowering price and expanding output, that too requires a calculation. Will that incentive lead to an interest in lowering prices? It will depend on, again, the profit calculation. Will expanded output at a lower price lead to greater profits? Often, in the analysis of competitive effects, we need to consider both the incentive to raise price and the incentive to lower price. And upward price pressure and downward price pressure are useful tools that economists use to evaluate those competing incentives. It also leads to easy and hard judgments. Let's think about, for a moment, easy cases and hard cases that may face the agencies. An easy case for enforcement will be a case where we have abundant evidence of actual or likely anti-competitive effect, and perhaps little or no evidence of significant efficiency. An easy case against enforcement would be a case where we have very little evidence of anti-competitive effect, but perhaps some or even abundant evidence of efficiency. What are the hard cases in competition policy? The hard cases are the ones that present both kinds of effects and reason to believe that both incentives may be at work. Perhaps there's significant evidence of both anti-competitive effects, an incentive to exercise market power, but there is also significant evidence of potential downward pricing pressure owing to efficiencies associated with the conduct. At this point, the weighing of the evidence becomes critical. One way to think about these hardest cases is to think about the incentive to exercise market power, the upward pressure on price, and also the downward pressure on price that may be brought about by evidence of efficiencies. The agency needs to make a prediction about which of those will be the predominant effect. They typically don't try to quantify, measure, and then balance, determining which is the measurably greater effect, but they do evaluate the likely predominant incentive. Will it be to raise price, or will it be to compete aggressively? Finally, let's think about how the agency is going to approach this question of pro-competitive effects. What kind of evidence will it be looking for as it evaluates the justifications being offered by X and Y? Well, first, it may consider whether those justifications are really even cognizable or recognizable as sufficient justifications for anti-competitive conduct. If their investigation so far suggests that the conduct may indeed lead to anti-competitive effect, what kinds of justifications might tend to dissipate the incentive to raise price? They may look at whether or not the justifications offered are really plausible. Are they based on sound economic theory? But also, are they based on evidence? Are they supported by evidence? And will they be of sufficient nature that they might actually dissipate the complete incentive to raise price? For example, it could be that there are some justifications, some reasons to think that the conduct will reduce costs, but that those reductions will not be sufficient to really counteract the incentive to raise price. As we go to the next scene, consider how the agency evaluates both anti-competitive effects and pro-competitive effects? What kind of evidence do they look at, and how do they evaluate the competing evidence of anti-competitive and pro-competitive effects that may result from X and Y's conduct?
Well, thank you very much for coming in today. As you know, we've invited you in because we have some fairly serious concerns about the loyalty rebate scheme that you and Stanmore have introduced. So can you explain the reasoning behind the scheme, please?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we introduced the scheme because we want retailers to invest in our brand. Retailers have actually been very happy with the scheme, and a lot of them have joined immediately as we introduced it. Investing in our brand means that retailers understand the products that we sell and they provide a better service for consumers. And to make that investment worthwhile, they need to invest in additional retail space devoted to our products. That's really the key to success in this market, otherwise you don't sell any products.
But the rebates you're offering are fairly significant, aren't they? So it must cost you quite a lot.
Well, as I said, retailers are investing in our brand. That's really important if you're going to sell high-end flat-screen TVs. And from a strategic point of view, it makes perfect sense to ensure that retailers understand and market our products well.
Well, it looks like you put up prices around the same time. Was that part of the same strategy?
Well, we wanted to increase our demand for our products through having additional display space in shops. Consumers benefit because they get a wide selection of our products in the shops and they get a better service. Of course, those improvements do have their costs.
I mean, you make a reference to consumers benefiting, but we've actually received a significant number of consumer complaints about this, in particular their high prices, less cost and less choice in the market, and also that Nash is no longer stocked by many retailers. So this doesn't really sound like the good outcome for consumers that you're suggesting.
Well, that was really not the intention of the scheme. It really was to increase our sales numbers in competition with Stanmore and Nash, not about removing choice.
But we have evidence to suggest that this wasn't about you competing with Stanmore. As you know, we visited your offices earlier this year and we came across an email from you to the CEO of Stanmore. So have you got that email? Thank you. Yeah, here we go. So if I just quote from it. Dear Bob, attached, please find the template as discussed. Price adjustment will be in 4 weeks' time. Treat strictly confidential. So, I mean, that would appear to suggest or to show that you're agreeing with Stanmore to introduce similar schemes and similar price rises. Isn't that the case?
Well, you have to understand that we and Stanmore have similar business models. We both invest in our distribution chain and retail network to make sure that customers are getting a good service at the point of sale. Nash has a completely different business model. They don't make that investment, and in fact, they're simply free riding on the investment that we and Stanmore have made.
Oh, so is this why you introduced the scheme?
No, as I've explained, we introduced the scheme because we wanted to protect our investment and we wanted to improve the service that we offer to customers through our retail network.
We've actually got a copy of an internal memo from your VP to you, which is about this loyalty scheme, and it specifically says we could increase the rebate to 15% for those retailers who've stocked more of Nash's products in the past.
So this evidence seems to suggest that you were deliberately planning to foreclose Nash's access to retailers and distributors in agreement with Stanmore. Also that you were planning to share information in order to coordinate a price increase. Now, both of these activities, as I'm sure you know, are anti-competitive and they've harmed consumers by restricting choice and increasing prices. So I'd be really interested to hear what you have to say about that side of things.
Well, I've already explained our very good strategic reasons for bringing in this scheme. I think if you want to read something else into it, then that's something we need to discuss. But we're very clear that this scheme helps us market our products and is ultimately good for customers.
This scene showed the Competition Authority putting substantiated concerns to the parties and allowing them to respond. Whenever an agency is relying on a theory of harm, it is important in investigations that the parties are given a chance to respond. In this case, the Competition Authority, having heard all the evidence, decided that the balance of evidence demonstrated that the conduct was anti-competitive. But this was a hypothetical case, and admittedly a stylised one. Other cases might feature other issues like countervailing buyer power or other mitigating factors. Let's now hear from some agencies around the world on some of their practical case experience.
F&E, we're trying to introduce competitive effects analysis on mergers and on abuse cases also. Often this is not a very task in countries like Chile because of the lack of public information that can be used for the assessment of the cases. Also, the information that can be gathered from the parties or third parties often have errors or miscalculations. So considering the time constraints, we have to take steps from the beginning of an investigation in the planning of what sources are we going to take into consideration and what data we're going to request. One area where more consistently we're making use of analysis of competitive effects is in the merger cases. In these cases, parties are more willing to collaborate with us and to report and forward information that is relevant to the case. Regarding a particular case, we would like to explain what we did on a merger case regarding the supermarket industry. In September 2010, the Fiscalía submitted to the Competition Tribunal a final decision or final assessment of a case. It dealt with a takeover operation of the largest wholesale distributor of groceries and other products, Alvi, by a large supermarket chain, DNS. What we did was a competitive effects analysis with the data that we obtained from the firm's part of the operation and from third parties. We used monthly price data from various DNS stores, the supermarket chain that was acquiring Alvi, around Santiago, and controlled the basis and was controlled on the basis of proximity of an Alvi store in order to measure the intensity of competition with and without the presence of Alvi. Two different models were tested in this analysis. The first one, we used price data. This price data was explained by 4 variables: the presence of an Alvi store in a radius of 5, 10, and 15-minute drive, the number of competitors in the same radius, and the type of supermarket, hypermarket, express, or basic, and also the type of area. In the second model, the number of competitors were replaced by the local market concentration indices. So some interesting results came out of this analysis. It was suggested that the presence of Alvi did push Walmart's prices down, especially in low-income areas. We detected that low-income customers were very fond of buying in these distribution and wholesale premises because of low cost and quantities that could be bought by them. So after this analysis, our report was sent to the Competition Tribunal and a case was opened. Regardless of that, after our report, the parties announced that they will not continue with the operation.
So our topic is countervailing power versus monopsony power. This issue arose in a recent application to the Commission by Fonterra, which is a dairy producer and also one of New Zealand's largest exporters. What Fonterra was proposing to do is to form a buying group through its logistics arm, Katahi. What Katahi was going to do is purchase transportation services on behalf of other exporters. So rail, trucking, and really the main focus being ocean freight services provided by shipping companies. So the question that the Commission faced from a legal perspective was whether Katahi as a buying group for exporters would result in the lessening of competition. And if it did result in a lessening of competition, whether the detriments of that would be outweighed by the net public benefits. From an economics perspective, the question of whether Katahi was likely to result in a lessening of competition was really a question as to whether it would be result in countervailing power or monopsony power. So if it were just countervailing power, this actually would be viewed as efficiency enhancing by the Commission. If it's monopsony power, on the other hand, this would have been viewed as efficiency reducing. So what is the difference between the two? Countervailing power is exactly what it sounds like. What it is that the buying group is able to countervail the upstream market power by the suppliers. In this case, the trucking companies, if indeed they do actually have market power, the rail companies, or as I said, the main focus being the ocean freight service companies. And in that case, what we have is a depression in price, but the depression in price is not so low that it falls below competitive levels. And because we have a price decrease, and as in most cases when we have such a price decrease, it is associated with an increase in output. This increase in output is efficiency enhancing. On the other side, if we actually have monopsony power, so the upstream supplier of the good doesn't have market power, and the price that the good is actually sold at is the competitive price. If we have a further depression in price as a result of the buying group, the price falls below competitive levels, and we actually have that associated with a decrease in output. This is because now it's the supply curve that's dictating the amount of output that actually comes onto the market, and price is now below competitive levels. Suppliers are not getting a competitive return, and so they're actually going to withdraw product from the market. Some suppliers might exit, or they just reduce the amount of output they make available, or they could actually just decrease the quality of the goods. So on a quality adjusted basis, we still have this decrease in output.
I will be talking about the carbonated beverages case that we recently decided in December 2011. This is a case where we focused on the effects of conduct in the marketplace. The cases involving carbonated beverages have a long history in the Commission. The first was brought in 2000 by Pepsi against Coke. The second in 2003, this was Big Cola against Coke, and then this is the most recent one, 2008, Pepsi against Coke again. And this complaint was admitted in 2008, and among the evidence that Pepsi presented were 300 sworn affidavits by local store owners that talked about exclusive agreements between Coke and these local store owners. It's particularly hard to find harm from 300 affidavits in a market that includes more than 1 million points of sale, and that represents 70% of carbonated beverages sales in Mexico. Coke does indeed have a dominant share of the market. 80% of the market is held by Coke. And an additional difficulty is that not all of the players in these markets are structured in the same way or have presence nationwide, although the case was brought as a nationwide case. The Commission decided to launch a full-scale investigation in part to set some evidentiary standards both within and outside of the Commission. The technical problem that the Commission faced was to determine whether this conduct was indeed widespread or if it was isolated, local, and really did not account for harm, or widespread harm at least, and to determine if this conduct had the effect of excluding rivals or foreclosing the distribution channel regionally. And to do this, the Commission sought to build a test that would show whether the economic agents in the market were able to attain a size or scale that made them a viable long-term competitor. The test consisted of 3 distinct parts. The first was to determine whether, under normal conditions, an entrant was able to become at least as efficient as a dominant player, or at least to have the possibility of attaining an efficient production level. The second was to determine whether this conduct was prevalent in the market. And the final part of the test was to look at whether the dominant firm was able to maintain or to increase its dominance through the use of these exclusive agreements. We built the test by determining whether the entrant was able to reach a minimum efficient scale. This minimum efficient scale, as you will see, is the lowest point of the average total cost curve. And we were looking at whether, with some degree of confidence, we would be able to say if this agent was to the left of the lowest point of the minimum of the average total cost curve, or if he was to the right of this average total cost curve. If the agent was to the right of the average total cost curve, we would determine that the agent was able to attain a scale that would allow him to have long-term viability. If he was to the left, this would not be the case. And then after we calculated this average total cost curve with data from the industry as a whole, we then compared the regional data for individual agents to this industry-wide nation average total cost curve and looked at whether the agent would be able to continue in the market as an efficient player. We found that in most cases, the complainant was able to attain this minimum point, and that in those cases where the agent was not able to attain a minimum efficient scale, this was true for all agents in that region, and it was mainly due to geographic reasons in that market. In addition, the Commission obtained funds to hire an expert to draft guidelines on survey design, and the agents were free to decide whether or not they wanted to present survey results as evidence. But the Commission did use these survey results to obtain indirect evidence on the affidavits and to determine whether these affidavits were representative of conduct in those locations. And we found that in most of those locations, exclusive agreements were not common, and that even in stores where these exclusive deals had been found, these were short-lived. After a certain amount of time, these stores no longer had exclusive agreements. Finally, we did not observe that the dominant agent was increasing its dominance as a result of isolated exclusive deals. And with this evidence, the plenum voted in December to unanimously close the case, as there was not enough evidence to find competitive harm.
As you can see, competitive effects can arise in a variety of different circumstances and cases. We hope that through this module you will have learned more about the effects-based approach to competition policy and enforcement, how it is done in practice, and what some of the important considerations are. Thank you.